Hey everyone, welcome to our channel. My name is Brian and this is Tadzi. Today we're super excited to show you our very first attempt at a Mandalorian helmet.
We'll take you through each step, our mistakes, and how we fixed them, from 3D printing to sanding to painting and everything in between. So let's dive into it. The first step was the preparation. We were able to obtain a free schematic online. The link will be in the description. We sliced it down to 9 separate pieces because our printer bed wasn't big enough. We could all relate to that. Oh.
Real.
We printed the 2 main pieces on the Ender 3 SE and all the smaller components like the side pieces on the Ender 3, which is a lot slower. It took around 3 days to print the entire helmet, but since we have everything printed, we can start putting it together.
Now that we've finished preparing our materials, we can now put the helmet together. There are a few ways to go about assembling the helmet, but we chose the plastic solder route. The one mistake we did make is we did it inside, but we won't talk about that. We started off by making small divots along the edges of our pieces to weld the helmet together. Once it was secure, we reinforced it by adding extra plastic on both the inside and the outside. This gave the helmet a stronger bond, making it much more solid.
So we messed up. We started off by sanding the entire helmet and pieces with 60 grit sandpaper, hoping to smooth out the imperfection and layer lines from the 3D printer. A little spoiler, it didn't work. What did we get ourselves in?
We're too deep in.
We ended up causing more scratches and divots in the helmet. We proceeded with 80 grit and 120 with high hopes. That's where we brought out the plastic wood filler to cover up the entire helmet in hopes to fix our previous errors.
After the filler dried overnight, we sanded it down with 220 grit and followed by 320 grit for that nice smooth finish, for the most part. While sanding down the wood filler, it did not come off in layers as we expected. It came off in chunks, adding to the imperfections that were already there, although it did fix some of them.
Now on to painting. We started off by spraying the helmet and the side pieces with 2 wet coats of primer. Then we went back and sanded it down again to help remove any of the imperfections. Then we primered it again. We then sprayed on 2 coats of satin purple. We unfortunately made another mistake while spraying on the first layer of clear coat. Due to the cold temperature, it clumped in multiple spots, forcing us to go back and wet sand it. After we wet sanded, we were able to spray on 2 more coats of satin purple. We let it dry overnight and we sprayed on another clear coat on. Another problem we ran into is orange peel. If you don't know what orange peel is a bumpy or textured finish that happens when the paint doesn't apply smoothly, making the surface look like the skin of an orange. Usually this is caused by temperature, getting too close while painting, applying too much paint, and more. We then went back and wet sanded it one more time. After the helmet dried from the wet sanding, we were able to spray on 2 more coats of satin purple. Then, once that dried, we did 2 passes of clear coat, and this is what our final result looks like. For the most part, it's okay. We definitely could have done better with the clear coat, but we were worried about the orange peel due to the weather fluctuating so much and us touching grass for once. But this is good enough and we moved on to our next step.
With everything painted, it was time to glue all the components together. Since the side pieces didn't line up exactly with the mask, due to some assembly mistakes, we had to sand them down to fit properly. So we grabbed our trusty Dremel and went to work. Once we got all the side pieces to fit correctly, we used super glue, applying it anywhere the pieces connected to the mask. Because everything was a bit crooked and uneven, we also added some Gorilla Glue for extra security. Overall, the helmet looks very good. There are a few small gaps, but they're pretty hard to notice. For our first attempt, I'm really pleased with how it turned out. Definitely better than I expected.
The final step in building our Mandalorian helmet was attaching the face shield. For this, we used a 5% tint to make it as dark as possible, which you can pick up at your local Walmart or craft store. We cut out a piece the size, measuring it carefully, and trimmed it down to fit. For adhesion, we choose to use hot glue, allowing us to remove or adjust if we need. Our first attempt didn't go well. The hot glue left lines in the film, so we peeled it off and tried again. This time, we glued it down one side at a time to avoid any lines or bubbles. The final result was good, although there was still some gaps at the top because we didn't glue it up there. From a foot away, it looked solid, Looking back, we should have used a thin, flexible, clear plastic sheet to apply the tint to. That would have made it easier to fit in the mask and given it a clearer look. But we worked with what we had. If you avoid the mistakes we made, your project should turn out even better.
Alright, so let's talk about the mistakes, the many mistakes that we made. Our first mistake is how we went about printing the mask. Since we were using a free design, the diameters do not match up with our printer. So we had to slice it into multiple pieces to make it work. In hindsight, we cut them down a lot smaller than we should have. To save time, we used the Ender 3 SE to print the bigger pieces and the Ender 3 to print the smaller pieces. Halfway through printing the first main piece of the helmet, it slid right off the build plate. Turns out we didn't have enough adhesion, forcing us to reprint said piece. To fix this issue, we started by using hairspray on the build plate to strengthen the adhesion. A little tip, don't leave your house if you're using hairspray. Later, we switched to using glue sticks because it's not flammable, unlike the hairspray. The second issue, in addition to using two separate printers, was that the Ender 3 SE has an auto leveling bed, which makes the prints even and consistent. While on the other hand, the Ender 3 does not have an auto leveling bed, making the prints not as even and not as consistent. Our second big mistake was the sanding. We started with the 60 grit sandpaper, then moved up to 80, 220, and then 300. This was one of the mistakes we made as it left a lot of large scratches and scars that took extra effort to fill. We'll be fixing this issue in our next iteration. After researching online, we found that wood filler could help smooth out these imperfections, so we gave it a try. And while it did help, it was thick and difficult to spread evenly. After applying, we sanded it down and the result was pretty decent. Looking back, we could have done two things differently. First, applying the wood filler, painting over it, and then sanding would have likely given us a smoother finish by keeping the filler intact. Second, mixing the wood filler with an additive to thin it out would have made it easier to spread. A couple of good alternatives to wood filler would have been Bondo or using a primer and filler spray paint combo. Moving on to another mistake we could have avoided was repainting the mask 4 times. Once everything was sanded down and looked decent, we sprayed it with a coat of primer and let it dry. After a light sanding, we applied the purple satin coat. It looked pretty good, but there were still visible imperfections due to the wood filler. We then added a clear coat. However, on the day we applied it, it was cold outside, causing the clear coat to clump and create uneven spots. We decided to sand it back down using wet sanding, which greatly improved the mask finish by removing many minor imperfections. The final result turned out okay. The clear coat could have been better, but for our first attempt at making a helmet, it's a solid result. With more experience in spray painting, I think we could achieve even better results. A 2-in-1 spray paint, like a high gloss, might have simplified things by allowing us to just use one type of paint instead of 2. Finally, our last mistake was the tint. We initially glued it directly onto the helmet, which looked acceptable. However, we found it would have been better to apply the tint to a thin, flexible plastic sheet. This would allow us to cut the plastic and glue it inside the helmet, creating a cleaner finish. For our next helmet, we'll definitely go this route, but for our first Mandalorian helmet, we'll leave it as is.
We shared all of our steps, challenges, and fixes we encountered on this journey, creating our first Mandalorian helmet. From printing issues to painting techniques, and even our attempts at adding the finishing touches like the face shield tint, this project was a great learning experience. The reason why we went over each mistake in detail is to help you avoid the same mistakes. Trust us, making a helmet isn't as simple as it looks. If you're planning a similar project, our biggest tip is to take your time with each step, preparing the prints, sanding carefully, and controlling your environments while painting. Even a part of the process can make a big difference in the final result. For us, this was a solid first attempt. There are definitely things to do differently next time, but seeing the helmet come together and look as good as it does makes all the effort worth it. We hope our experience can make your build easier, smoother, and even more successful. Thanks for watching, and if you have any questions, leave them in the comments and we'll do the best to help. Until next time, peace.